Hello everyone, ጤና ይስጥልኝ. My name is Emeline and you're watching ETA to Z on Arts TV. If you look at the mosaic behind me, you can see that Ethiopian history has mostly been dominated by men. And yet, Ethiopian women have provided important contributions and made remarkable achievements throughout the centuries. Today, we're going to discover some of the most influential Ethiopian women rulers. Follow me. You might be familiar with the Queen of Sheba, also known as Magda or Nigist Azeb. Her tale has been told for thousands of years, and even though her existence is disputed by historians, she's undoubtedly part of Ethiopia's national pride. Her name appears in the Bible, the Quran, and other books, including the Kebra Nagast, The Glory of the Kings, a national epic account written in the 14th century. The story mentions her love affair with the king of Israel, Solomon, was the starting point of the Solomonic dynasty that ruled Ethiopia, or rather Abyssinia, until 1974. Indeed, the Queen of Sheba bore a child, Menelik I, who became the first king of the Solomonic dynasty, who is also credited with bringing the Ark of the Covenant to Ethiopia. As you can see, the only woman ruler who is displayed here is Empress Zewditu, the daughter of Menelik II, also known as Nigist. Three years after Menelik's death, the designated heir to the throne, Zewditu's nephew Lijiyasu, was accused of apostasy and overthrown by a coup d'etat in 1916. It was then Zewditu who assumed power alongside Prince Regent Tafari Mekonnen, who became Emperor Haile Selassie. Empress Zewditu was known to be conservative and very religious. I am in Chaitu Hotel with Professor Baharu, historian and emeritus professor at Addis Ababa University. We will continue to discover the lives of the Ethiopian empresses who made remarkable contributions to Ethiopian history throughout the centuries. Professor Baharu, ደህና ኖት?
በጣም ደህና ነኝ። አንቺ ደህና ነሽ?
ደህና ነኝ. Today we're going to talk about Ethiopian empresses. But before diving into their life stories, I would like to ask you one question. Do you consider that these prominent female figures have received the recognition they deserve, or have their contributions been somehow neglected or even forgotten?
Yeah, it depends on which empress you are talking about. I mean, the more recent ones are quite clearly recognized, like Taitu, but the earlier ones, they are not really that much known, because most of what has been written about them has been in English or French, and so the Ethiopian audience is not familiar with their achievements and exploits.
Today we have decided to highlight the story of three female leaders. Who did you choose first?
I chose three empresses, really, because all three of them made quite an impact on national politics. The first one was Queen Eleni. Actually, her first name, her maiden name was Itejanzala. She was the princess of Hadia, the daughter of a Hadia chief, and she lived in the 15th and 16th century. And she was married to Emperor Yacob. Emperor Yacob is probably one of the most famous medieval emperors. After Amdetsion, he consolidated the empire that was built by Amdetsion and his successors. And he was also a kind of philosopher king who wrote quite a number of books on religious matters and so on. So she was married to him. Unfortunately, she was barren. She couldn't bear a child. So she didn't have any influence in the succession process. As a matter of fact, after the death of Yacob, there was a succession struggle for power, which lasted quite a few. It was when Emperor Lebna, who is famous with the wars of Hammer Grany, who was the emperor at the time of the Grany campaign. When he became emperor, he was young. He was a tender age, so she was made a kind of queen mother. Mm-hmm. That's when she started to exercise influence in Ethiopian politics.
What kind of influence?
A kind of stabilizing force, because it was a period of turmoil, a period of struggle, a period of fighting and so on. But she managed to really stabilize the political situation and managed to give Lebna a chance to kind of flourish and eventually become one of the successful emperors, although of course he was defeated by Grany. Mm-hmm. But probably her greatest achievement is in beginning an initiative that she took to build an alliance with European powers, specifically Portugal. Mm-hmm. She sent an Armenian envoy to the King of Portugal to build an alliance with Ethiopia, because at the time Ethiopia was threatened. This lady was initially Muslim, but of course eventually, after converting to Christianity, she became a zealous Christian. And she was aware of the danger that was looming. And so she approached the Portuguese king for an alliance, but she was able, actually her initiative was eventually succeeded in bringing about the famous Portuguese expedition, which came to the rescue of the Christian kingdom during the wars of Hammer Grany. She was also famous for the building of one of the most beautiful churches in Ethiopia, Martula Mariam in Gojam.
The second empress that you wanted to talk about is Awab.
Her name was actually initially Braham Mogasa, but eventually it was changed to Mentawab, probably because she was beautiful.
What does Awab mean?
Mentawab means how beautiful she is. And she was beautiful and intelligent, and she was the Emperor Bakafa, the King of Bakafa, who was the king of Gondor at the time, was attracted to her and he married her. And she bore a son. Unlike Eleni and Aitu, she was fertile. She could bear a child, but the two others couldn't. So her son Iyasu II, when he became emperor, she became a very powerful figure, queen mother or Etege. In fact, she was called Etege. And that's how she became to exercise power. She was originally from Kwara. This is the westernmost part of Gondar, and was not really part of the Gondar establishment, although she is supposed to have some royal lineage through her mother's side. After the death of Bakafa, after Iyasu became emperor, she was effectively the power behind him. Mm-hmm. She was the one who was exercising, and she brought quite a number of her relatives from Kwara, and her brother Woldalul in particular was a very powerful and influential figure. She was able to dominate, she and her clique or group were able to dominate Gondarian politics for a long time.
And what was her greatest achievement?
Other than being a very powerful figure, she was the patron of arts. The church building like Narga Selassie on the Lake Tana, Narga Selassie. Yes. The church was built by her. She was a patron of arts. In fact, there are quite a number of beautiful arts ascribed to her, not patronized by her, In one of them, at least, she's actually seen lying down in the painting. So the famous Gondarian style painting of the 18th century. So she was also famous for building the palace and church of Kuskan. She lived at a time when James Bruce visited Ethiopia, and he came to know her very, very closely. So we have a very detailed portrait of the woman.
So now let's talk about Aitu.
Aitu, that's where we are.
Exactly. She founded this very hotel, right?
Yeah, well, the emperor actually built it, and he named it after her. And he called it not Aitu at the time, he called it Etege Hotel. Etege automatically meant, of course, Aitu. So we're in the right place, basically. Yeah. So Aitu is probably one of the probably of all the three, the most powerful, the most impactful empress. Her family is from Semen. and Yeju, and also her mother is from Gojam. She was married, I don't know how many times, I think 4 times before she married Menelik. She was supposed to be beautiful, although some of her portraits are not very flattering. Because it's probably after she got fat, I think. So her beauty has kind of diminished with age. But more than her beauty, I think her intelligence, her commitment to Ethiopia, to Ethiopian independence, her loyalty to Menelik, the kind of advice that she was able to give him during the confrontation with the Italians, in particular during the controversy of the Treaty of Uchale. She was probably the most powerful figure, influencing the decision to go to war rather than surrender to any of the demands that the Italians were making to accept the Treaty of Uchale.
When people describe Taitu, usually they say that she was a military strategist.
Yeah, in a way, but at least this has got to do with the Battle of Adwa. I think her role in the Battle of Adwa, I think the military strategy has got to do particularly with one incident, and that is the siege of Mekelle. After the Italians were defeated at the Battle of Ambalage, that was the first encounter, the first battle. They retreated back to the north, and they built a formidable fortress near Mekelle, on the outskirts of Mekelle, called Nigist. And this was a very powerful fortress. The Ethiopian troops, led by Ras Makonnen, tried to storm it and suffered quite heavy casualties because it was impregnable almost. And there was a stalemate. So that's when Taitu came with the idea, don't lose your soldiers unnecessarily. I think there is one strategy that we can adopt, and that's to cut off the water supply. And so the water supply was cut, and then the Italians had no choice but to surrender. So that's a military strategy. And of course, as a whole, during the campaign, she mobilized all the women to take care of the wounded, to take care of the provisions, and also to encourage the soldiers. When there were reverses, ups and downs, to and fro. And when the soldiers were retreating, she and her women were the ones who were actually shaming the soldiers. Why are you coming back? How can you have abandoned Menelik and so on?
Were women fighting too, or they were just encouraging male soldiers?
Mainly encouraging, not fighting really.
I see.
And then, of course, Taitu was famous for the founding of Addis Ababa. That was basically her idea.
Why did she choose Addis Ababa?
Well, the decision to choose Addis Ababa had a background. Before that, they were camped at Ntoto. Ntoto was a kind of capital. After Ankober, they came to Ntoto. And then from Ntoto, they were commuting. The royal family and the nobility, they were commuting between Ntoto and Fuluha.
Yes.
The hot springs, because it had a curative value. Eventually they said, why keep shuttling? Why not settle here? And the decision was made by her. At the time, Menelik was campaigning in Harar. This was in 1886, Arsi and Harar and so on. So she decided, when the time came to leave, to go back to Ntoto, she said, I'm not going back. I will build my house here. And the nobility said, of course, how can we abandon our queen? So they built their houses here, and that's how it was started.
So she was stubborn.
She was stubborn. She was determined that this is the place for the capital city. And she sent a letter to Menelik, and that letter she said, of course, the first time she mentioned the city, the name Addis Ababa in that letter. That's the letter which shows you when it was actually founded.
Do you believe that those stories, the stories of those female leaders, should be taught better or more at school?
Yes, because there is an imbalance. There's a very clear imbalance because Ethiopian history has been dominated by men. It has been dominated by politics. There is a need to shift. It's not only empresses, actually. The ordinary women, how did they live? Social history is also something that has to be encouraged. When you do social history, then you really begin to appreciate the role of women in society. So there is quite clearly an imbalance which has to be rectified.
Thank you so much, Professor Baharu, for sharing your knowledge with us. It was so interesting. I learned actually so many things. ዛሬ
Okay, good. Thank you.
አመሰግናለሁ።
እኔም አመሰግናለሁ።
I hope you guys enjoyed this episode of ETA to Z. See you all next time. What are your primary sources for your research on Ethiopian history?
It's not my research, it's not my area actually. Of course, those who do research in that area, of course, you have the chronicles, you have the travelers' accounts. In the case of Muntawa in particular, James Bruce is a very important source. But the chronicles, the chronicles give you a lot of details about these earlier emperors. When you come to Taito, again, we have the chronicle and also, of course, the travelers and lots of biographies as well.